The paperwork felt weightless in Ella's hands as she stood in front of the county courthouse steps, still unable to process what had just happened. $45. That's all it took to own 16 acres of land and a 2-story ranch house in rural Wyoming. The tax auction had been swift and clinical. 3 other bidders had walked away after seeing the property photos, muttering about foundation issues and the cost of demolition. But Ella saw something different. She saw a second chance. The November wind cut through her jacket as she drove the 43 miles from Casper toward the property, following a dirt road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. The landscape stretched endlessly, sagebrush and dried grass rolling toward distant mountains already dusted with early snow. Her 13-year-old Honda groaned over ruts and potholes, the GPS losing signal twice before she finally spotted the turnoff marked by a leaning mailbox with the numbers barely visible. 2847. The house materialized through a curtain of cottonwood trees, their bare branches scratching against a gray sky that promised snow. It was larger than she'd expected, a weathered 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch that had once wrapped around the entire building. Several windows were boarded up, and the barn in the distance had partially collapsed. Its roof caved in on one side, but the house still stood, solid despite decades of neglect. Ella killed the engine and sat for a moment, her breath fogging the windshield. 6 months ago, she'd been managing a successful accounting firm in Denver. Then came the embezzlement charges, not against her, but against her business partner. The investigation had taken everything: her reputation, her savings, her carefully constructed life. The firm dissolved, clients vanished, and suddenly at 38 years old, she was starting over with barely $4,000 to her name. The front door resisted, before giving way with a groan that echoed through empty rooms. Inside, dust particles danced in the weak afternoon light filtering through cracked windows. The air smelled of abandonment, mildew, old wood, and something else, something organic and out of place. Hay. The living room was stripped bare except for faded wallpaper showing pastoral scenes and a stone fireplace blackened with years of use. Ella's footsteps echoed on warped floorboards as she explored, noting the relatively intact kitchen with its ancient appliances and the narrow staircase leading to the second floor. But that smell grew stronger as she moved deeper into the house, toward what appeared to be a former dining room. The door was closed, wedged tight with a piece of 2x4 braced against the frame from the outside. Ella stared at it, her pulse quickening. Someone had deliberately sealed this room. Recently, too, the wood was clean, unstained by years of dust. She removed the board and pushed the door open. The horse turned its head toward her with liquid brown eyes that held an intelligence that made her breath catch. It was a magnificent bay gelding, perhaps 15 hands high, standing in what had once been an elegant dining room, now converted into a makeshift stall. Fresh hay covered the floor, water buckets sat in the corner, and the windows had been covered with thick plastic sheeting. The animal was well-groomed, healthy, clearly cared for despite the bizarre circumstances. "Jesus Christ," Ella whispered. The horse nickered softly, not afraid, almost relieved. She approached slowly, hand extended, and the gelding stretched his neck toward her, nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. His coat gleamed even in the dim light, muscles defined under healthy skin. This wasn't a neglected animal. This was a valuable horse someone had hidden with considerable effort and expense. Ella spent the next hour investigating. She found a stack of feed bags in what used to be a pantry, all purchased within the last month according to the receipts, still attached. In a small closet, she discovered a saddle and bridle that made her heart skip. Custom leather work with silver conchos, the kind that cost thousands of dollars. And on the wall behind where the saddle had hung, carved into the old plaster, a registration number and 2 words that changed everything: Fortune's Crown. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone, praying for signal. 1 bar. Enough. She typed the name into a search engine and waited for the page to load. The results made her sit down hard on a dusty chair. Fortune's Crown. A championship quarter horse reported stolen from a breeding facility in Colorado 3 months ago, valued at $180,000. Owner offering a $25,000 reward for information leading to his recovery. Ella's mind raced. The cheap auction price suddenly made sense. Whoever had hidden the horse here had also probably arranged for the previous owner to lose the property to foreclosure, creating a perfect hiding place in plain sight. A place no one would think to look, isolated enough that a horse could be kept without neighbors noticing. But why keep him at all? Why not just transport him across state lines and sell him? The answer hit her as she looked at the horse again, really looked. There, on his right shoulder, partially hidden by his thick winter coat. A distinctive white marking in the shape of a crescent moon. Fortune's Crown was too recognizable, too famous in quarter horse circles. He couldn't be sold legitimately, and any buyer in the underground market would know they were dealing with hot property. Someone was waiting for the heat to die down, for the investigation to go cold, for the registration papers to be successfully forged. The sound of tires on gravel froze her in place. Ella moved to the window and peered through a gap in the plastic sheeting. A black Ford F-250 had pulled up beside her Honda, and 2 men were getting out. They were dressed like ranch hands, worn jeans, work boots, heavy jackets, but something about the way they moved, the way they scanned the property with military precision, set every alarm bell ringing in her head. She ducked back, mind racing through options. The front door was too obvious. The back door led to an exposed yard with no cover. Her phone showed no signal now. The one bar had vanished. The horse sensed her fear and shifted nervously, hooves clattering on the wooden floor. Ella put a hand on his neck, feeling the warmth of his body, the strong heartbeat beneath her palm. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "Easy." Heavy footsteps on the porch. The front door opening. They didn't even bother to knock or call out. These men knew the house was supposed to be empty. "Check the back rooms," a deep voice said. "I'll take upstairs." Ella's eyes landed on the saddle. A crazy plan formed. Crazy because it was her only option. She grabbed the saddle and bridle, working as quickly and quietly as possible. The horse stood perfectly still as she tacked him up, as if he understood the urgency. She led him to the exterior door of the dining room, a set of French doors that opened onto what had once been a patio. The lock was rusted, but gave way under her desperate twisting. Cold air rushed in. "Someone's here!" The shout came from inside the house. "The Mazda outside!" Ella swung herself into the saddle, her rusty riding skills from childhood camps coming back in a flood of muscle memory. She squeezed her legs, and Fortune's Crown leaped forward, understanding immediately what she needed. They burst from the house at a gallop, hooves thundering across dead grass. Shouts behind them. Then the sound that made her blood run cold, a gunshot. But Fortune's Crown was bred for speed, and he ran like his life depended on it, which it did. They crashed through a broken section of fence and headed for the cover of cottonwoods along what Ella prayed was a creek bed. Branches whipped past, the horse dodging and weaving with the sure-footedness of an animal that knew how to survive. Another gunshot, farther away now. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, following the creek northeast until Ella spotted buildings in the distance, a working ranch with lights on and trucks in the yard. She pushed Fortune's Crown toward it, and the horse, sides heaving but still strong, carried her home. The ranch belonged to Samuel Garrett, a weathered man in his 60s, who'd seen enough of life not to ask too many questions right away. He took one look at Ella's pale face and the lathered horse and simply said, "Come inside. I'll call the sheriff." Sheriff Madison Torres arrived within 30 minutes, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, who listened to Ella's story with increasing interest. "We've been looking for Fortune's Crown since September," she said, making calls on her radio. "There's a whole task force working horse theft rings in this region. You just stumbled into the middle of a major operation." Over the next few hours, the full story emerged. The men who'd chased Ella were part of a sophisticated ring that stole high-value horses, hid them in foreclosed properties they'd specifically targeted and manipulated into auction, then waited months before moving them out of state with forged papers. The property Ella had bought for $45 had been carefully selected, remote, in foreclosure, with a tax lien that would guarantee a cheap auction price and minimal scrutiny. "They probably had someone ready to bid," Madison explained. "But when you showed up and bought it first, you became a problem they needed to solve." The FBI arrived the next day. Ella gave her statement 6 times, always the same. She'd bought property legally, discovered an illegally concealed horse, and been forced to flee when armed men attempted to assault her. The evidence was overwhelming. The makeshift stall, the feed receipts, the registration number carved into the wall, and most damning, the 2 men who'd been caught on a neighboring property trying to flee. Fortune's Crown was returned to his owner, a breeder named Nathan Chen, who cried when he saw his horse again. The reward check he handed Ella felt surreal. $25,000 for simply being in the right place at the catastrophically wrong time. But the real surprise came 2 weeks later when Nathan called her. "I've been thinking," he said. "Fortune's Crown clearly trusts you, and I need someone to manage the Colorado facility, someone with business sense, someone who can think on their feet, someone the horses seem to choose." Ella stood on the porch of Samuel's ranch. He'd offered her his guest house while the legal situation resolved, and watched snow fall over the Wyoming plains. Behind her, Samuel was teaching her the basics of ranch management, sharing 40 years of wisdom about land, animals, and the kind of honest work that built character. "I need some time," she told Nathan. "I need to learn this life properly before I can manage others doing it." She spent that winter working for Samuel, learning everything from fence repair to foaling season preparation. The accounting skills that had once defined her took on new meaning as she helped him organize his books, modernize his business practices, and develop a succession plan for the ranch he'd built over decades. Spring came with the clarity only earned through hard work and honest reflection. Ella had lost everything in Denver, her business, her savings, her sense of self. But she'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that she could adapt, survive, and even thrive when stripped down to her essential self. She accepted Nathan's offer in April, but with conditions. She'd split her time between Colorado and Wyoming, helping Samuel transition his ranch to new ownership while building Nathan's breeding program into something sustainable and ethical. And she'd use part of her reward money to buy another foreclosed property, not to flip for profit, but to create a sanctuary for rescued horses seized in theft operations. The day she signed the papers for the Colorado position, Ella drove back to the abandoned ranch one last time. It sat empty under a blue sky, the kind of crystalline spring day that makes Wyoming feel like the edge of the world. The house looked smaller now, less menacing, just an old building with a strange story. But as she stood there, she realized it had given her more than she'd lost. The $45 ranch had cost her nothing and given her everything: a new career, a new community, a new understanding of resilience and second chances. Sometimes the best deals in life aren't the ones we plan for. Sometimes they're the ones that chase us down a creek bed at a gallop, forcing us to choose between who we were and who we might become. Ella chose to become someone who could ride through fear into something better. And that, she thought as she drove away for the last time, was worth more than any price tag could capture. Claude é uma IA e pode cometer erros. Por favor, verifique as respostas.